Hello and welcome back to WA Real. I'm your host Bryn Edwards. WA Real brings you real and authentic stories from fascinating people here in Western Australia. Stories to inspire and guide you to take action to be all you can be. Today is a real treat as my guest today is Dr Richard Walley OAM. Born in WA and raised in Pinjarra, Richard is a globally renowned performer, musician, writer and voice for Aboriginal issues and culture in Australia. Among his many achievements and awards, he's performed in 32 countries on all continents, received a doctorate of letters from Murdoch University, awarded Order of Australia, been named as State Living Treasure for his lifetime contribution to arts and culture, and is also Fremantle Docker #1 ticket holder. But that is just the surface as the list goes on. Richard, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Thank you. As I did my research to meet you, I started to look through all the things that you've achieved and the awards that you've been given, and on one level it was very impressive and on another level it was actually quite intimidating. Who is Richard Walley underneath all of this? How do you identify yourself or describe yourself?
I'd have to say I'm a very lucky person to grow up on the shirt tails and skirt tails of some very wonderful people. My mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers were fantastic people, and they gave me lots of guidance. And when I say my mothers and fathers, my mother and all of her sisters and cousins were my mothers, and also we had adopted mothers as well, older people who take you under their wings, and same with the men, some of the older men who take you under their wings, and they'd see essence in you, and then they'd guide that essence and allow you to make some decisions yourself and make some mistakes, and know that you've always got a safety net there if you fail. And I think that was my greatest, and still is my greatest asset. Is anytime I look for a problem at this present, I'll always go backwards and look for an answer in the past.
Right.
And that's a fantastic thing. And that works for everything but computers and technology. So if you get glitches there, there's always a phone call for a doctor to come along, and a technician, and fix it all up for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Superb. So you were born in, was it Mirakartha?
Mikathara.
Mikathara.
Yeah, I was, my grandmother on my father's side, and my father Yamaji. And Yamaji's a very big area that covers into the Mikathara, Mullawar, up around that, up towards Carnarvon. So it's a big chunk of West Australia in the Yamaji area. My mum's mother and my grandmother from that side, the maternal side, is Nyoongar. So I was very blessed to be born into the two different nations of Nyoongar Nation and Yamaji Nation.
Right.
So that was quite a blessing as well. But when people say I was brought up in Pinjarra, we weren't actually brought up in a town, we were brought up in the bush.
Yeah. And
that bush area ranged out of Pinjarra, out of Mandurah, out of Varuna, out of Harvey, out of Rockingham, out of Medina, out of Fremantle. So we lived out on the outskirts in the bush areas. So that was something that when you get into the discussion, you realise that you weren't in one spot. You weren't in the town and the surrounds. I think I was 16 when I first got into a house in town.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what was it? What was it like growing up at that time?
Oh, it was amazing, because you'd be waking up and to the sound of birds and animals continually. So you got used to that as being your sort of your alarm clock in the morning. You knew exactly what time which bird would get up or what sound would be created. So that was amazing, as compared now to which truck's going to go past your place at 5:30 in the morning and which is 6.
Which neighbour's pulling out and drive.
Yeah, which neighbours pulling out and drive. Well, you know what time they usually take off. So it is, if you take that into the bush setting, it's that beautiful melody of nature that you're surrounded with, and it's also the smells and the ambience of being in a bush surrounding. it was fantastic. It was challenging as well. I mean, don't get us wrong, there were times when you wished you had a house, when it was raining and windy and sticking hot and things like that, and you're going to put up with the mosquitoes and flies, and you get ways of keeping them away from you. I think there was, with those challenges, it made you very appreciative what nature's got around and what nature is about, and that you have to do a little bit of work yourself, and you condition yourself for those surrounds. And I think one of the greatest things you learn by living with nature and out in the bush is that you adapt to nature and its climate. Whereas the moment you get into a house, the first thing you do is fight the climate. So you'd get a heater if it gets too cold, and you get air conditioner if it gets too hot. You don't allow your body to adapt to those extreme changes. Whereas the birds and the animals are still operating as they did for thousands of years. They've got no heaters and no air conditioners, but they still survive. And so I think those sorts of lessons are ones you take throughout life, that you if you don't condition yourself to nature, you can decondition yourself, which could be a bit of a challenge in the future.
What was it like when you first moved into a house then? Was it at 16?
It was a bit challenging, because when you're in a house, you start to realise that there's a door and there's walls, and it's bigger than what you're used to, because our bush camps were smaller, put together pieces of bush and timber around the place that my father would actually construct. So you'd see the size of it for a start, and I think other things you start to marvel at, like you turn a tap on and there's water rather than going to a well. There's other things like you can actually have a shower now, rather than everyone heat the water up and you've got that one bathtub that you all take it in turns with. Those sort of things that people take for granted now, that you realise they weren't taken for granted. And just turning a light on. This is electricity rather than having a kerosene lamp that you make up. And those are sort of simple things. And to have a fridge, they're all sort of the luxuries that people take for granted now, but they weren't for us. And I think that at times challenge, if you're brought up with all these accessories all your life, you don't know what to challenge or how to cope without them. I think that's a bit of a challenge.
Yes. Yeah. As you become very dependent and very comfortable.
Very much so. Very much so. And I believe that's why a lot of people are going back now for camping and bushwalking and spending a bit more time in nature, because they realise that there's a fantastic essence about being out in the bush and being one with nature. And you have this feeling, whether it's walking through a bush or swimming in a river or an ocean, or you have this oneness with nature which grounds you very well. So from then on, once you walk out of the bush or get out of the water, you take life in its stride. You're thinking, well, that was really, really good. That started me on a wonderful first footsteps towards the day. Yeah.
What do you do to ground yourself now? We're sitting here in Willerton, not in...
Well, now what I do to ground myself, I still do that. We still walk in the bush, still do some bushwalks. I think that'll never change. I think it's fantastic. And but I do a lot of artwork and a lot of music, and it's always good. So you go in nice little mind journeys that takes you on these little joints of creativity. And I think that grounds you a lot. And the art and the music does that. So when you're into painting, your concentrations and onto that creative canvas, and your mind's not on what's the next meeting or what I have to prepare for tomorrow or whatever it is. It's in that moment that you're creating that. Or if you're playing some music, you're actually in that zone of music that you're playing, or if you're weaving or doing any of those sorts of things, your mind is relaxing. It's like I acquainted to clearing the desk. Then you could start over again. So whenever I work on projects, I'd go in that project and I'd keep going. And as you're going with the project, you find you start to get cluttered. So more and more things start to gather around you when you're on the project. Then when it's completed, you sit back and you're thinking, geez, there's a lot of mess here. So you'd clean all that off. That's done. You'd see what it took to make that project.
Yes.
But once you clear it all out, then you're ready for the next one.
It's done.
So the residue's not there from the last one. So you start all over again. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
So you were 23 when you were selected to become the chair of the Aboriginal Advisory Board. What was it that brought that about, and what was it that made you want to go and do that?
Well, I didn't really want to do it. I was nurtured into it. When I first started this, what made me is that the shirt tail of those elders and the skirt tail of those elders, they were around within my family, but also outside my family, because older people recognise when young people have got qualities or values or potential, and they see that, and they're very generous, particularly those who've got a lot of experience. They're very generous with their knowledge and their guidance, and I was blessed with that because I was open to it. And you're open to taking guidance from people who do things very well. Yeah, it's a win-win. So I was open to that. So when I got into that world of social justice and political advancement for Aboriginal people and our Nyoongar people, and it was under the guidance of a lot of very good people. And so by the time it came to these meetings, I knew the structures of a meeting as a young fellow, and I was blessed to be pretty well educated. I was able to then know how to get through an agenda or set up an agenda so that we can get some outcomes that we require, so we can move on without readdressing the same issues over and over, which happened in a lot of the meetings at those times where people got stuck and you'd talk about issues and talk about them, then nothing could be done. But at the same time, the advancement that the elders have made up to that point and beyond were actually magnificent and fantastic. So I was able to bring a sort of a fresh approach to it as a young fella. But again, by no means was I a puppet to the elders who'll pull every string. But they allowed me to make decisions, and they saw that when I'd make decisions, I'd come from a good basis and an equitable basis, and not from a self-gaining angle. It was all about what's the good for the collective, and how we as a smaller group from the collective can make things better for as many people as possible. And they saw that, and I still see that today. I still find that if you can do what you want as an individual, that's your choice. You can engage in any form of arts or sports or politics or any professions, advance yourself personally, which is a fantastic thing. But once you get to a stage where your advancement is there to share and you're able to pass some of that knowledge on, I think that's the beauty of getting that stage and passing that knowledge on to other people. So I'm at that stage where the elders now pass it to me, and I'm passing it back to another generations. Yeah,
that's quite a gift, isn't it?
It's a blessing.
Yeah, blessing.
It's a blessing. And so as a young fellow, my mentors, very close to me, warned me of the dangers of alcohol and cigarettes. And, so to this day, I still don't smoke cigarettes. I never ever smoked or drank alcohol. So that's something that, my greatest guidance, or the dangers of the drugs that you may get involved with, because anything you take into your body it's got a consequence. It's either good or bad.
Mm.
And if you realise that, then you know that to keep yourself balanced, you have to balance your diet, balance your intake, and those sorts of things are very important, because you know those are the knowledge that elders passed on. So that balance is a very, very good thing to have. So if you take those balances into meetings, then you're looking at how we can go forward as a collective. Sometimes you have to make some very hard decisions, because there may be a couple of times when people may not like what you're doing because they think, well, it's not good for them. And then you've got a challenge, and they may have a bit of support. But if you see it's beyond them and it's good for the collective, that's what it's about. So that's the difference between it.
That's an interesting point. How do you get that message across? Because, you know, as I look across today's society, there's a lot of me in it. And how many decisions are we making for a bigger good?
Yeah, there's two answers to it. One, do you have to be balanced with yourself first before you try to be balanced with everyone else? So you've got to know that even within your own makeup, regardless of who you are, whether it's me or anyone else, you've got to know that there's some challenges within your characters as well. You've got to know that there's some things that you'd like to improve, or you don't quite get why that occurs. But you have to, once you recognise those sorts of things and those sorts of challenges, that's when you'll be able to go to a meeting or to an area and talk about what you feel is right and live with it. And if you don't win, that's fine, but you stay with it. So there's lots of times I've made calls where I was completely voted out, and the majority were against me, but I stuck to what I believed. A lot of the times it came out that, you know, what I stuck by was good and the principles were right, and I was proved right in a lot of times, and a couple of times I was proved wrong. And that's how you learn to live with that. So you learn to live with your own imperfection and realise that sometimes I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But right now this feels right.
But if it feels right at the time, and that's all you can go by.
Mm. That's the first part you said. You've got to be right within yourself.
You've got to be right within yourself, and you've got to feel that it's right.
Yeah.
And over the years, if you make 1,000 decisions and 900 of them are good ones, you're done good.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's good odds.
Yeah.
So what was there any particular, when you took over that role, was there any particular impact that you wanted to have, or anything specific?
Not really, because when you get nominated into a role, all the positions that I've held over the years, I've never actually put an application in. I've always been approached to be a part of. Right. Would you chair this? Would you be on our board? Would you be on our one? So I had that invitation, and that's a good way of going, because that's a cultural way. A cultural way is you get invited on because people see your expertise and they want to utilise that for the collective and the greater good for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that when you're welcomed into a situation, you're coming into a situation where everyone's quite receptive to what you want to bring to that cause or that organisation. Mm. Whereas if you're standing for elections against someone, or you're going to, there becomes that dynamics and competition that takes place, which is, to me, it's quite healthy at some times, but not all the time. It's an area of sort of sharing the load. My role of chairing, and I've chaired a number of different organisations over the years, is to learn it as a collective role of sharing and chairing. So I'd always have a vice president or vice chair or deputy chair, and even someone in the stand-in. So what I'd do is we'd all look at what my committee or my board were made up of, and then I'd relate the agenda to their expertise. Right. Then I'd get them to chair that particular session. So that way they're the expertise on, and they're steering a session that their expertise on. That's why they're on that particular board. Yeah. So my role is not necessarily to know everything and guide everything. Mm. My role is to get the greater good out of everyone on that area and linked the agenda items up. So that's how I chaired my committees and boards for a number of years. And what it did, it made us a lot stronger as a board, because each and every member knew that they were on and their expertise were appreciated, and utilised. So when they took that moment, they took it for what it was. We get an outcome and we move on. And everyone was comfortable. And as I mentioned, there's sometimes you don't know, and you'd go through to an agenda item, and one of the members would say, well, such and such knows this quite well. They've been involved with this area. I'd say, well, that's wonderful. Can you steer us and chair this and take us through? So even though sometimes you don't read what other people have done, but the collective know. And that's how we did it culturally. See, in the culture, we didn't have one leader. We had many leaders that would lead us through different subject matter or different challenges. And that's how the culture operates. And then you've got the best person at the steering part for that particular challenge.
I was going to ask, where did you get that insight from, of being able to link stuff? It comes from within the culture. It comes within the culture.
Within the culture, we have this sharing and way of making decision making, and that's what leadership is about. It's about sitting down and analysing a situation and thinking how we're going to manoeuvre our way through this. And if you at times have it's you're up front steering it, and other times it's a relay where you pass the baton on and someone else will move it to the next stage.
And does that also come back from living on the land and having to deal with what's in front of you as well?
Very much living on the land, because when you look at a waterhole, it's the waterhole is shared by many, birds, animals, some plant, and that collective, what makes the waterhole unique. And people always talk about projects or something, and what am I going to get from the waterhole? Well, what's around the waterhole? That's important as well. So I find that if you know what's around the waterhole, and you know how the other parts of that around the waterhole are interactive, then you take that way of nature and bring it into a boardroom situation. It's the same thing. We're all human nature. So there are some people would like a particular flavour or brand, and others don't. So you've got to find that this is not about you, the individual. How do we do this as a collective?
Yes.
Then you, the individual, can make your own choice of which direction you want to make.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how you contribute to the collective.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a fascinating way of looking at things, because too often we can end up with leaders of organisation, and it's their way or the highway, and off we go.
And that's the problem with the politics as well. What you've got in politics at the moment, you've got heads of parties and heads of organisations, and then the whole image and brand is around those leaders and not around the collective. So the personalities of the leader reflects the brand.
Yes.
Which I don't think is a very fair reflection of what the collective are about.
Yeah.
And a good example of that, of course, is in politics. There's sort of three parts to politics. I think the one is the personalities, which is very clear. People are I, me, my personality. Mm-hmm. And that's always about point scoring, and there's two parts to that part as well. That what my expertise and traits are, and I want to highlight those, but also want to highlight what the weaknesses or any faults that I can see in my opposition. I'm going to highlight and reflect those as well, which is it's not a very good way of going. Denigrating someone else is not a very good thing to do. So I think that's one part of it. The second part of it is that you're collected as a party policies, and you're put down to oppose, particularly in opposition. It's always easier in opposition to talk to media and make comment on every subject matter, because you're there to what the old cliches say, to keep people honest. But you're very much a nitpicker.
Yes.
And you're a nitpicker that magnify things that you find that may have no impact on the subject matter, but it's something that's an opinion and trivia that can create a conversation and put a bit of doubt in people's minds, and I think that's not a nice thing. But the third part, which people don't see, which is way under the table and under all the politics, is that the politicians get on with each other. Most of them, regardless of what parties, will share the same hallways, the same dining rooms. They have conversations. They're decent people. And unfortunately, due to the system, the majority of Australians do not see the decency in our politicians.
And that's probably magnified by our media as well.
Very much so. Yeah.
That likes to feed adversity, fear, and doubt. And
very much so. And there's a lot of people feeding them that information as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there are certainly times I feel when bigger issues that may span a longer horizon than 4 to 5 years of a term, and how do we bring people together to make serious decisions around that? You know, we talk about climate.
Very much so. I think the length of time that you have to make decisions and put programs, projects, policies into place is far too limited in a political sense. If you're running a business, if to start your business off, you forget about the first 18 months of it. That's all the learning and getting into that new way of how you want to operate. And it's a classic case of your business start to level out about 3 years. In 5 years, you're quite productive and you're up and running. It's very rare no government ever is comfortable for 5 years. This disruptive, even if they've got 2 or 3 terms, they have to disrupt themselves to go through the elections.
Yes.
So it's stopped.
Yeah.
And goes through this process, then we start again. So you're going backwards before you go forwards. And you have to readdress a lot of stuff, because if you've got policies and programs in place that are working, you can't just stay with that and say, look, things are going well now, we're not changing anything, we're on a good road.
Yeah.
We're going to go to the elections with the same we had last time. It doesn't work.
No.
So you've got to try to...
People like new and improved.
Like new and improve. And how can you new and improve something that is not new and not improved? Because you're actually readdressing issues that have been around for decades. Yeah.
So, with this in mind, how has the sort of impact that you've wanted to make through the efforts that you have here, how has that changed from the 23-year-old to now?
Oh, yeah, you are who you are by learning from what you've done. And as I mentioned, if you make 1,000 decisions and 900 of them are really good, but there's 100 mistakes, they're the ones that shaped you to where you are today. I have a little saying that experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. So if you've been knocked back and been down a few times, but you got up and moved on again, that's experience. You learn from it. If you learn from those setbacks, then you're progressing. If you don't learn and you give up and say, well, that was too hard, I'm not doing that anymore, that's another decision too. So that's not a setback. That's saying, I've had a go. I have a problem with people who don't have a go and think, oh, that's too hard. Okay, I've given up already before I started. I firmly believe it's a wonderful thing to go to the edge of your comfort zone and out of it, and discover new things, and then come back and say, well, that was quite exciting, and I'd do that again, or well, that was quite challenging, I'm not going to do that again. But you've had a go at it. Yeah. So as a young man, I toured around places like Europe and the US, but mostly Europe, where they didn't speak English at those stages, at some of the areas in Germany and places like France and that, where you were challenged. You had to point to what you wanted to order. And in those days, of course, the currencies were different. You didn't have the €1. You had a lira in Italy, and the francs and the marks in Germany. And then I went to East Germany, where they had East German marks. So you had to rethink the value of what's it compared to a dollar. All those sorts of challenges that people take for granted, you didn't take them for granted then. You had to think about it, and that gave you a different outlook on a value system. So those sorts of being outside your comfort zone was absolutely fantastic. Uncomfortable at the time, but when you come back, you go, "I've survived it." And thank God for being naive at a lot of times, because you do some things out of naivety that you'd never do now. You walked into places or around places, particularly in places like New York. I walked into areas where people said, "How did you survive that?" Or I stayed in Inglewood in Los Angeles at times, where the height of the gangs with the Bloods and the Crips had each other's throat, and I was in the middle of all that in an Inglewood hotel. Thought it was quite wonderful to be up and down, and didn't realise what's around you. So those sort of things, and were quite sobering experiences, because when you look back and say, "Well, what could have been?"
Yes.
What could have been is a lot of things, but nothing happened. You didn't. The intuition that I had, I felt safe. I felt secure. It's the same old bush skills that I had. I felt if you feel there's something a bit of dangerous over here, I'm not going there. So there were places I walked over. Wherever I walked, I felt safe.
I was going to say, I imagine that naivety was probably what looked after you as well.
It very much so. It did.
Because you're in a exploratory, adventurous mode, which is not threatening to anybody else, and you're not putting that energy out to anybody. That's
right. Yeah, and particularly in that Los Angeles era, I'd see the young fellas on the street, and they'd wave and I'd wave, and that's such a... They knew who you were. You're not in their neighbourhood without... No, I didn't know that at that time. I thought, they'd pick you out, and they knew I was from Australia, and I wasn't either on one side or the other. And so those sort of things were quite good for me. Yeah.
Where does the love of music and performing come from?
Again, uncles and aunts. My aunt was a very good dancers. My uncles were musicians and dancers. My father was a dancer, traditional dancer in that sense. So we were brought up with it. It's like it's intergenerational with us. One of my uncles was a very fine accordion player, and he'd play the accordion for the Aboriginal dancers and Nyoongar dancers down in the Pinjarra area. And a cousin of mine was a very good drummer, and had other cousins who were guitarists, and so they were very fine musicians. I had cousins who were piano players. So it was brought up around us in that sense. And singers, they've always been singing. We're a very happy group. We're blessed with that. So that music was ingrained in our DNA.
And what was the decision like to go out and perform over the world and do that? How did that come about?
Yeah, that World's performance came again by invitation. I did a couple of presentations and performances here, and were invited to, because I did my traditional dance, when the traditional dancers from the Kimberleys and the Pilbara, and particularly the Kimberleys more than Pilbara, but the Kimberleys would come down and do performances. They'd invite me in to perform with them because they knew I was a dancer. So they had a dance called a wonga, which is sort of a general dance where they get people in and you all do there's a couple of set steps, then you've got some free-flowing steps. So they'd invite me in, but I was brought up doing the mirars and my own dances. So that to come in to do their dance under that invitation in the general public, that was when I first started to come out and do some performances in there. But our mirar dances, we were doing those for our families and smaller groups for quite a while. And before we took it nationally and internationally, so it was really homegrown on that, and support from our family and friends. So when you do your performances, it's like the conversation of a meeting, or we said before, you've got to do it for yourself first and feel that what you're doing is the right thing, and you go with the energies, and that's what it's all about. And it's always been the same. And again, a lot of the performances have been absolutely fantastic. A couple of you cringe and think, gee, that was horrible, and I'd never do that again, or I should not have done that. But you did it and you learn from it. You know, so that it was not always lights and posters. It was sometimes it was just little performances here and there, and sometimes you think, well, I'm glad that's over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was the dancing and performing another way to get a message out across the world, or
mostly through music and through the microphone and telling the stories of the dance and the performance? We do it in such a way that it was inclusive, so people can relate to it. And I think it's always good to share sort of social injustices around the world, but unless you can acquaint it to where people can actually associate themselves with it, you're going to miss the mark.
Right.
So your humanity is a wonderful thing. You appeal to people's humanity by saying, if you're a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, and your young child sibling was taken away, how would you feel? So rather than talk about the stolen generation, say, well, the whole families was broken up by this, you say, well, how do you feel about someone taking your newborn away, or your 5-year-old goes to school and they don't come back? So you put it into those sorts of stories and songs and those areas. That's a social justice, and you'd find that people can relate to it. And a lot of people in Australia were very unaware of the Aboriginal history that's around them, and they're still unaware. So you take the opportunities, through dance, through songs, through music, to relay a lot of these messages, because you find that people listen to them and want to go deeper into those songs. I think the classic was things like Archie Roach's "Took the Children Away," was appealed right across the world. But before that, there was a song by Bob Randall called "Brown Skin Baby." They took the brown skin baby away. So those songs make social impacts around. So we wrote our versions of it and take those around to our communities, which people can relate to, and the non-Aboriginal people can relate to as well. And I think that was the beauty of the performance, and to show that we may have advanced in many areas, but we've still got a strong foundation in culture as well. So a lot of our cultural presentations are still linked to, you know, the 60,000 years that we've here. We've still got that same language, using the same type things like the boomerangs and the spears. They're still here. So those iconic links to the past are very important. But we also got some advancements that we take into the future. You know, the using of wool for plaiting of dance gear, the didgeridoo, which is introduced to us from the northern parts. It's a part of our tradition now, not part of our heritage and culture, but it's part of our culture and tradition now, because it's intergenerational. Those sort of things, I think, were very, very good for spreading a message. And one of the good messages for particularly the didgeridoo, which I use a lot of, it's a message of how we used to share in this country before settlement. We shared with different parts of our own different communities. And by being blessed to play the didgeridoo by the traditional elders, it's a link to what's been happening thousands of years, where they gave blessing to people to do other things well before the didgeridoo was invented.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said there about there's a lot of sort of white Australians who don't understand Aboriginal culture and heritage. And I myself moved here 7.5 years ago from England, and although I have an Australian passport, I still don't quite. Well, I don't, and I'm being very open and honest, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come and talk to you today. How does somebody like myself start to learn more?
Well, I think one way of looking at it is to get the subject matter that you know well and look into that area, because there's a vast array of subjects that you can talk about within Aboriginal culture, whether it's the arts, the social justices, the sciences, the politics. There's a lot of different genres. But I think if you're interested in things like, say, for example, storytelling, if that's what you're interested in, you look at, well, what's the traditional storytelling method? Why was it linked to place, purpose, people, plant, animal. What's the connections there? And if you look at those, some of the Western storytelling, the greatest Western storytellings are in literature, and in the religious areas, in things like the Bibles and the Qurans. You look at those storytelling places, they're actually telling you what happened and giving you guidance to go forward.
Yeah.
Then you equate those to the stories and the guidance to go forward that we have in our historical stories and traditional stories. You'll find there's parallels. So we do have our parables, we do have any examples, we do have those guidances, and also the warning signs. They're all there. That I think that's the beauty of taking a subject matter and you say, well, okay, these have been handed down for X amount of years. The Sanskrit's been written down and that's survived. All this Latin's been translated. Ours is one of the rare ones that has survived without any visible interpretation. There's no paintings about the stories in the vast areas. Each painting has a story, don't get me wrong. Each carving has a story, but some of the greatest song lines and some of those things were never ever written down. They were passed from generation to generation, and they got stronger as they passed down. So I think those are sort of things that you can acquaint to, and then you realise the beauty of a story that survived for thousands of years by being handed down from person to person, as compared to someone that writes it down and makes sure we keep it alive for the future.
Yeah.
Well, it's our responsibility to keep our stories alive, and we took that responsibility extremely serious. And I think that's, again, where we started. As we started the interview off and the conversation we're having here, we started off by saying, what's making me, it's those who've gone before me who have handed that down. Each generation have a responsibility to hand down, particularly the essence of the culture, the language, the dance, the stories. And if you tap into those, then you'd find that the culture itself was came from extremely strong foundations. Stronger than the foundations that any European introduced foundations ever come from.
Yes.
And I think that's the essence of culture today. And the Western world and the European world and the Australian world are starting to understand that and being receptive to it. So we're quite blessed now to have these conversations. If you wanted this conversation 20 years ago, you'd be talking to an anthropologist and say, how did the Aboriginals do this, or what did the Nyoongars do?
Yeah.
So we're getting to speak directly, and people are getting first-hand information. And it's like anything that you acquaint to, whether it's denial is a horrible thing. Once you get past that denial and accept that something has happened, we accept that there's a history here. As Australian people accept that there's a history. A lot of it's unsavoury. It's not very good, but let's face up to it. Mm-hmm. Let's see how we can move forward. We've got to include Aboriginal people in the conversation and the discussion as equals, and not as, well, look what we've done now, let's see how we can rectify it. And I believe that's sort of the way forward now, is that a lot of the organisations, the people in these organisations are starting to embrace Indigenous knowledge as a way of going forward rather than looking backwards.
Yeah, because it's an opportunity to tap into years and years and years, and tens of thousands of years of knowledge and history that's been carefully passed along. Whereas I find there is a certain, at times we can have a certain level of arrogance that we know how things are going to map out without necessarily consulting the past.
Exactly, and that's what ignorance and arrogance is. It's at the forefront of a lot of failures, and a lot of people gets blamed for things that they weren't a part of the decision of, but they're a part of the process. I use the old analysis. The early settlers, when they came here, if they were psychologists and analytical skills of just standing back and says, where are we at the moment, what are we coming into, they'd have taken some notes. Yes. And some of those notes would not have been the economical opportunity of look at all the trees and land that's around there that we can take advantage of, which they came and saw. Mm-hmm. So it was really economical opportunities that drove them, and not social building and social balance that was around them. Because what we have here, we had a balance between person and nature.
There wasn't that looking at the waterhole and who's around it.
That's right. Or I own the waterhole.
Yeah.
People saw the waterhole as an asset. I'm going to build next to the waterhole, so that's my waterhole now, not ours as a collective. Mm. That sort of attitude was on the first one that's taken. I think the other one that was taken is that the ignorance and arrogance and stupidity of not seeing how a system operated effectively for thousands of years and tap into it was just absolutely ludicrous. Mm. You came from a place that was in chaos. You came from a place that was, been embroiled in warfare for centuries, and you come to a place where there's no warfare. You say, well, how did you all get on with each other? That's the first question, rather than saying, oh well, we know better because we've got the superior attitude and mind, and well, you actually had an inferior attitude and mind. Because you didn't have what the structures were existing here that had economical, environmental and social harmony that were all enwrapped into each other. Mm. So we didn't have to have the prisons. We didn't have to have the hospitals. We didn't have to have the government agencies. We didn't have to have the organisations to the parks and wildlife look after nature. We didn't have to have any of those because it was ingrained and installed into every person as part of their belonging and responsibility. So that is something that the Western world could not comprehend. Mm. And even to this day, they can't comprehend. And a lot of people are starting to realise now, hang on, if we took that same structure and system that operated thousands of years ago and operated before we came here, maybe in 2,000 years or 1,500 years' time, we'll be able to operate a society without any jails. Mm. So those are sort of simple little questions that you've asked yourself, and the even stats will show you that you keep going the way we're going now. It's not sustainable.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't even think we need stats for that. I think we just need to ask ourselves deep down.
Yeah. So that sort of information that's already ingrained into the DNA of Indigenous people are still there to be shared.
Mm. So what's your focus nowadays? We sit here in your art room with tons of stuff around.
My focus it switches about 5 times a day. So, and that's good, because if you got one focus, particularly when you get older, you try to get as much done and much focus as possible. So there are some artworks that I'm working on and got to get out. There's a couple of consultancies that I'm working on that need designs and structures and engagement and infusion designs and structures, which I'm working on. So my focus is to take the knowledge that I've acquired up to this stage, apply it and hand it on to someone else and a couple of other people I'm working with, so they can take that knowledge and then hone it themselves, and that's how knowledge and the culture is alive. You don't take everything with you. You've got to build that transferring of skills and knowledge. Mm. And I'm at that stage now, so when I'm working on stuff, I'm working with other people in a collective, passing that knowledge on.
Superb.
Yeah.
What have you learnt about yourself along your journey?
Very simple. I like me, but I can't stand my type.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, what it actually means is that you know yourself, warts and all, in that area, and you'd know yourself that you could try to justify something that you can't justify. But because it's part of your nature and ingrained, you accept it at that. So if you're drawing up a model of an ideal person, you'd probably have in your own mind 75% of that ideal person be in you, but there's another 25% that's not ideal. Mm. And that's human nature, and that gives us our imperfections. and if you live with your imperfections, you're pretty well okay.
Mm.
So I think that's how I sum things up, is that you have to embrace your uniqueness and don't try to clone yourself onto someone else, and let people know that you're not the perfect specimen. You do the best you can. You've made a lot of decisions, and a lot of them came out to be very very good decisions, but there's a couple of them that you cringe about and think, gee, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Mm.
If you could go back and have a quick chat with the 20-year-old Richard, what piece of advice would you give him?
The same thing. I think, the hypotheticals are going back is a hypothetical, and I don't entertain that, because there's experience that's going to come along when I'm 25 that the 20-year-old would not have known about.
Yeah.
That made a difference to your lifestyle. I think decisions you make at times, you feel it's very good decisions. I think the younger you are, the more in the word of your own sense of id. I think the older you get, the more community minded you get. But human nature, particularly with children, when they're born, all they know is themselves. It's about me. And then they learn through the process of sharing. So the world expands as you're growing. So your first world is just your family and a small little world, and then your friends and the school start to expand your world. And the broader you travel, the broader your mind gets. So I always say to people, if an opportunity comes up, think about it, not too long, and take it. And if you learn from it, if it's a good thing, great. If it's not, if you're going to analyse it far too much and think, well, I don't know what's going to come out of this, that's not living, that's existing.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference. You got to live, you take some risks. To exist, you maintain a custom.
Stay comfortable.
Yep. Yeah.
Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. It's been super insightful.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.